Good evening. We will now begin the webinar. Today is September 29th, 2021, and the time is 6:01 p.m. This webinar is being livecasted and recorded and will be available publicly on the MTA YouTube channel and the Central Business District Tolling Program project website at new.mta.info/project/CBDTP. By attending this virtual webinar, you are consenting to be recorded. Today's webinar will begin with opening remarks followed by a presentation on the Central Business District Tolling Program and then public comments. Only those who signed up to speak in advance will be able to give public comments. If you've joined the Zoom under a name that is different from the one you used when you signed up to speak, please identify yourself in the Q&A function with the name you used when you signed up. If you did not sign up to speak at today's webinar, you may sign up to speak at an upcoming webinar. To do so, please visit new.mta.info/project/CBDTP or call the public meeting hotline at 646-252-6777. Anyone who joined the Zoom may also use the Q&A function throughout today's webinar to ask questions or provide comments. CART captioning and American Sign Language interpreters are available at today's webinar. We will now start with opening remarks from Dr. Allison Desereño, MTA's Deputy Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us this evening. We are excited to be engaging in public outreach for this historic project, and we thank you for taking the time to learn more and share with us your thoughts and comments. Joining me today are colleagues from New York State Department of Transportation and New York City Department of Transportation, as well as from the Federal Highway Administration, the lead federal agency for the project. We also have several individuals from our respective staffs here with us to listen to what you have to say. Your comments will be indexed and considered as part of the environmental assessment process. So with that, let's jump right in as there's a lot to cover. Our agenda for today is to review the proposed program, the project purpose and need, discuss the project alternatives, provide an overview of the environmental assessment, and discuss and describe environmental justice considerations. We'll take a few moments to talk about the potential project effects and benefits, and then have a public comment session. So how did we get here? There's been a decade of congestion. Congestion in New York City has consistently ranked among the worst in the United States. Local bus speeds in Manhattan are on average 7% slower than citywide speeds. Between 2010 and 2018, travel speeds decreased by 23% in Manhattan's Central Business District, or CBD. And during that same period, multiple studies and panels explored how best to address congestion, including the 2008 New York City Traffic Congestion Mitigation Commission and the 2018 Fix New York City Advisory Panel. Many of them came back with the same concept of congestion pricing. There is also a need for sustainable funding source for transit. Prior to the pandemic, nearly 75% of trips into the Manhattan Central Business District were made using transit. 95% of trips to the Manhattan Central Business District by low-income populations are made using transit. MTA's subway system is over 100 years old and must be repaired and modernized to meet the region's needs. And funding transit modernization would improve service and attract commuters back to the system, further reducing congestion. In April 2019, the New York State Legislature passed the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. If approved by the Federal Highway Administration, this act would entail vehicles entering or remaining in the Manhattan Central Business District be tolled. Net revenues would be used for public transportation capital projects, with 80% devoted to New York City Transit, 10% to the Long Island Railroad, and 10% to Metro North. The toll rates will be determined by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, or TBTA Board, informed by recommendations of the Traffic Mobility Review Board and after a public hearing. There are mandatory post-implementation reporting and evaluation requirements. To make sure everyone understands the area about which we're speaking, Central Business District tolling program boundary is south of and inclusive of 60th Street. Tolls would not apply to vehicles that are solely using the FDR Drive, Route 9A West Side Highway, including connections to the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel, or the Battery Park Underpass connecting the FDR Drive and Route 9A. Federal Highway Administration will serve as the federal lead agency for environmental review. They are responsible for reviewing all of our analyses to confirm that they are complete and they will also issue the environmental findings for the project. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority and its affiliate, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, the New York State Department of Transportation, and the New York City Department of Transportation are serving as project sponsors. With respect to the project purpose and need, the project purpose is to reduce traffic congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District in a manner that will generate revenue for future transportation improvements, pursuant to acceptance into the FHWA's Value Pricing Pilot Program, or VPPP. The project would address the following needs: reduce vehicle congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District, and create a new local recurring funding source for MTA's capital projects. The following objectives further refine the project purpose. It would reduce daily vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, within the Manhattan Central Business District, reduce the number of vehicles entering the Manhattan Central Business District each day, create a funding source for capital improvements and generate sufficient annual net revenue to fund $15 billion for capital projects for the MTA capital program, and establish a tolling program consistent with the purposes underlying the New York State legislation entitled the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. So how is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the project linked? NEPA requires federal agencies to assess and consider the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making a decision. The project would be implemented through the Federal Highway Administration's VPPP. As a federal program, that VPPP, or Value Pricing Pilot Program, is subject to NEPA. Federal Highway Administration is the lead agency and has determined that an environmental assessment with extensive outreach is the appropriate level of environmental documentation for this project. There are two project alternatives. There's the no action. There would be no Central Business District tolling program, no comprehensive plan to reduce congestion in the Central Business District, and no identified transit capital revenue stream. And there is the build or act alternative, where we would build a Central Business District tolling program. There would be new tolling infrastructure and toll system equipment, implementation of a tolling program, which would have multiple scenarios in the environmental assessment to assess and identify the range of effects, positive or negative. And there would be creation of a new revenue stream for investment in subways, buses, and rail. A little more detail on the proposed Central Business District tolling program alternative. As noted earlier, tolls would be charged for vehicles entering Manhattan south of and inclusive of 60th Street. Passenger vehicles would be charged once per day, and there are exemptions required by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act for qualifying vehicles transporting persons with disabilities, qualifying authorized emergency vehicles. Central Business District residents with gross adjusted incomes below $60,000 would be eligible for a tax credit. And there would be a Traffic Mobility Review Board that would be tasked with recommending to the TBTA board the toll structure, including but not limited to a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions. Recommendations will be informed by a traffic study and must take into account multiple criteria, including the ability to generate revenue required, the impact on traffic patterns and volumes, public safety, air quality, among others. With respect to the toll, the environmental assessment is going to assess a range of scenarios and will be informed by robust public outreach. Studying multiple scenarios ensures that we understand the full range of potential environmental effects, including but not limited to congestion reduction, that different toll rates may cause. Toll rates will differ in each scenario depending upon the time of day, how someone pays, and the inclusion and extent of any credits, discounts, and/or exemptions beyond the two mandated by the enabling state legislation. Importantly, all else being equal, the more credits, discounts, and/or exemptions that are given, the higher the toll must be in order to meet the project's purpose, needs, and objectives. The modeling is not complete, and a final determination of the toll rates will not be made in the environmental assessment. Indeed, the toll rates, as noted previously, will ultimately be set by a vote of the TBTA board after the environmental review process and after the Traffic Mobility Review Board makes its recommendations. So importantly, these numbers I am about to share are for informational purposes and subject to change. With that said, to give you at least a sense of the range of potential toll rates, we anticipate that the Easy Pass peak period toll for automobiles will range from roughly $9 on the lower end to $23 on the higher end if many credits, exemptions, and/or discounts are provided. The range of potential toll rates for automobiles using tolls by mail would be higher, roughly $14 to $35 for the peak period, again, depending upon scenario. Off-peak and overnight toll ranges may be lower, and tolls for trucks and other vehicle types would have different ranges. With respect to the study areas, The broad study area for the environmental assessment includes a region of 28 counties throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. There will also be more refined local study areas, including the Central Business District as defined by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. In other words, 60th Street and Inclusive and South, with those other areas excluded as we described earlier. And neighborhoods near the Central Business District boundary where the project could have social, economic, or environmental effects. In terms of the key topics of the environmental assessment, this is not the full list, but we wanted to at least give you some sense of the kinds of things we'll be studying. Among them, as you can see, regional transportation, which is obvious. We'll be looking at highways and local intersections, commuter rail, subways, and buses, parking and pedestrian and bicyclists. We'll also be looking at social and economic considerations and conditions. We'll be looking at the visual resources, air quality, noise, and environmental justice, among others. Environmental justice is an important consideration for the project. Given that over 51% of the population within our study area lives in environmental justice communities, we're going to spend some time walking you through the federal requirements to address environmental justice and some of the tools we'll be using to engage with environmental justice communities. The term environmental justice refers collectively to minority and low-income populations within a project study area. In 1994, President Clinton issued Executive Order 12898, which requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on environmental justice communities. In subsequent years, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration have issued their own orders on environmental justice. Our environmental assessment must comply with all of these orders. The orders provide that Federal Highway Administration take the appropriate and necessary steps to identify and address disproportionately high and adverse effects of federal projects on the health or environment of minority and low-income populations to the greatest extent practicable and permitted by law. This slide shows the steps we'll be using in developing our environmental justice analysis. It is based on guidance developed by Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. As you can see, we begin by identifying minority and low income or environmental justice populations and environmental justice communities. We engage in outreach with those communities, as you can see by the little picture on the right. We then determine whether the project would result in adverse effects on environmental justice populations or communities. We consider mitigations for those adverse effects of the project, as well as potentially offsetting benefits to the affected environmental justice populations. Again, there's outreach and engagement during that process. If the effects remain adverse after mitigation, we identify disproportionately high and adverse effects. If there are no disproportionately high and adverse effects, the evaluation is complete. If there are disproportionately high and adverse effects, we evaluate further mitigations or alternatives to avoid or reduce those effects. The Federal Highway Administration Environmental Justice Order provides specific definitions for minority and low-income populations. As you can see here, minority is defined by U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration as a person who identifies as Black, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Asian American, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, or individuals identified as some other race by the U.S. Census. Low income is defined by United States Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration as a person whose household income is at or below the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services poverty guidelines. For a family of four, the 2018 U.S. Census Bureau poverty threshold was $25,750 for the study area. Based on the definitions in the previous slide, we have identified the environmental justice populations in our 28-county study area. As noted earlier, and as you can see in this table, over 51% of our study area population is considered minority, and over 13% is considered low income. This map shows the distribution of environmental justice populations throughout our study area. The map shows large concentrations of environmental justice populations in New York City and the immediately surrounding suburbs. There are also large concentrations of environmental justice populations throughout our study area. Our public outreach will engage with these communities as much as possible. One way we'll be engaging with the communities is through the creation of an environmental justice technical advisory group. This is a group of technical experts who have knowledge of environmental justice considerations and can share concerns drawn from throughout the study area. The group is comprised of community leaders, advocacy group representatives, and industry group representatives with specific interest in environmental justice considerations. Their purpose will be to identify concerns and mitigation if needed, and help to ensure information is circulated as widely as possible to the larger communities. The technical advisory group will be by invitation only, and we anticipate the first meeting convening in early October of 2021. Potential participants will be contacted in advance. We will also be creating an environmental justice stakeholder working group. This is a group of interested members of the communities throughout the study area who would also like to participate beyond submitting comments or participating in the webinars. This group will be comprised of interested members of the community, and the purpose is to share concerns and request discussion on particular issues as appropriate. To suggest yourself or someone else, you may visit our website, or you may complete a form, or you can contact us by phone at 646-252-7440. We anticipate that the first meeting of this group will be convened in early November of 2021. And again, once we have all the names and contact information, participants will be contacted in advance. We're going to review some of the potential effects of the project. Importantly, these effects are dependent upon scenario. The next slide will highlight some of the potential benefits, but I'll take a few moments to talk through the bullets here. We anticipate that there may be effects where there would be new tolling infrastructure and equipment, that there might be changes in traffic in neighborhoods near the Manhattan Central Business District, and that there might be traffic that diverts around the Manhattan Central Business District to avoid tolls. Again, dependent upon scenario. Near the Queens Midtown Tunnel and the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel, we anticipate some traffic diversions on the highway system that could result in more than a nominal increase in traffic. Preliminary analysis suggests this change in traffic would not occur on local roadways and would not adversely impact air quality or noise in the neighborhoods where the highways are located. However, we will be looking more closely at the neighborhoods adjacent to both sides of these tunnels. Some drivers currently travel through Manhattan, although their destination is elsewhere. For example, you may travel from New Jersey to Brooklyn or the Bronx by going through Manhattan. Preliminary modeling indicates that some of these drivers may change their routes and traffic may increase in certain locations depending upon scenario. We will be looking more closely at the extent of those increases in parts of Staten Island, Brooklyn, Upper Manhattan, and the Bronx, and whether they could result in notable changes in traffic, air quality, or noise. Preliminary analysis also indicates that new transit passengers who may take transit rather than drive will be spread throughout the transit system and will not overcrowd any particular route or line. Based on preliminary analysis, the shift to transit would not notably change access to transit services, or pedestrian circulation near transit stations and hubs. In terms of tolls on low-income and minority populations coming to the Central Business District from throughout the region, a direct effect of the project on residents of the Manhattan Central Business District who are part of an environmental justice population is that they will be charged a toll to drive into the Central Business District. However, the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act provides a tax credit for those individuals whose primary residence is within the Central Business District and whose New York adjusted gross income is less than $60,000 per year. Preliminary analysis has found that fewer than 1% of the Manhattan Central Business District's commuters are low-income individuals who drive, but nonetheless, we are assessing the economic effects of the additional costs for these customers. Tolls on the taxi or for hire vehicle industry, which has a high proportion of workers who identify as minority, as defined by United States Department of Transportation guidance, are also being looked at. Industry data shows that a high percentage of taxi or for hire vehicle drivers identify as belonging to a minority population. Once there is a new toll for entering the Manhattan Central Business District, some passengers may no longer choose to use taxis and for hire vehicles. We will examine the effect of the project on the taxi or for hire vehicle industry and the resultant effect on minority drivers. With respect to potential project benefits, if approved, we anticipate the project would reduce vehicular traffic in and near the Manhattan Central Business District. Overall, and depending upon scenario, our models predict a 15 to 20% reduction in traffic volumes that would enter the Manhattan Central Business District each day. As a result, we would see improvements in air quality and traffic noise as there would be fewer vehicles. We also anticipate improvements in travel times within the Manhattan Central Business District, again, as there would be less congestion. And of course, the project would provide additional funds for subways, trains, and buses, funding the MTA Capital Program, which includes many projects to improve and expand subway, bus, and commuter rail service. This would benefit MTA's transit commuters, including environmental justice populations. I want to take just a moment to discuss or describe the anticipated NEPA schedule. We've already begun our outreach. That's what we're doing here today. And we anticipate that this outreach will continue through January of 2022, as we also prepare the NEPA environmental assessment. Between February 2022 and May 2022, there will be review with Federal Highway Administration of the document itself. And at the end of that period, the environmental assessment will be made available for public comment. Once the document is made available for public comment, there will be a public review period and a new comment period. That period will also include additional outreach related to toll rate ranges. Between that June 2022 date and December 2022, the work will be done to incorporate all of that information to make sure that the final outreach is done, and ultimately to have Federal Highway Administration make an environmental determination. If approved by Federal Highway Administration, future outreach and public hearings will be held as part of the Implementation and Traffic Mobility Review Board process during 2023. Here is the list of all the public outreach webinars we are holding. As had been noted in the distribution materials prior, you may attend any one of these or all of these as you would like. We also have the 3 environmental justice outreach meetings, webinars. Those will be occurring on October 7th, 12th, and 13th with slightly different focus areas. But again, as with the public outreach meetings, residents may attend any one of the webinars they would like to. In terms of our stakeholder working group meetings, we expect the first one in early November, the second one in late November, and then we expect a third one in June of 2022 once the environmental assessment has been released for public review. Thank you.
We'll now move to the public comment portion of today's webinar. We encourage anyone joining via Zoom or live stream to take a short survey using the QR code or link currently being displayed. The link can also be found in the Q&A section of the Zoom. We're gathering public comments today to inform the environmental review process. Comments will be reflected in the environmental assessment once it is made public. Rather than responding to comments as they are given, we will do our best to address specific questions whenever possible in the Q&A chat function. However, please understand that at this phase of the process, your question may be one that cannot be answered meaningfully until completion of the modeling and analysis. Joined the Zoom may also use the Q&A function throughout today's webinar to ask questions or provide comments. Please note that each speaker is limited to 2 minutes. We ask that speakers keep their remarks to the 2-minute time frame out of respect for all other speakers. We will be calling speakers who live in the geographic area that is the focus of today's webinar first, in the order they signed up, but everyone who signed up will be called to speak today. If you've joined the Zoom under a name that is different from the one you used when you signed up to speak, please identify yourself in the Q&A function with the name you used when you signed up. When you're called on to speak, there will be a brief transition on your screen. Please make sure that once your screen updates, your camera and microphone are enabled before beginning your remarks. You will not be able to unmute or enable your camera until it's your turn to speak. Please remain patient until then. In the event you miss your name being called, we will call the list one more time after all speakers in attendance have been called a first time. As a reminder, this webinar is being live casted and recorded and will be available publicly on our YouTube channel and our project website. By attending this virtual webinar, you are consenting to be recorded.
We will now begin the public comment portion of today's webinar. Our first speaker will be Senator Anna Kaplan, followed by Senator Todd Kaminsky.
Good evening. I'm Senator Anna Kaplan, and I want to take this time to thank you for this opportunity. When we set out to enact congestion pricing in 2019, we were trying to address chronic problems impacting our region: traffic and lack of investment in our public transit. Unfortunately, the pandemic has only made these problems worse. And it is so it is so much more important than ever that we enact the program without delay and that we enact it the right way. The promised 10% proceeds for the Long Island Railroad, estimated at $100 million per year, will allow for transformative investments to take place in our local infrastructure, like the purchase of the new train cars and overall improvements to service and reliability for Long Island commuters. This money must be protected for Long Island and must be used exclusively for the benefit of Long Island Railroad riders. And I will not accept any program that does not fulfill this promise. Additionally, in setting toll prices and exemptions, there must be a regional fairness if the program is going to be a success. There can be no preferences given to New York City or New Jersey residents that aren't also given to the suburban Long Island residents. Carving out certain people from responsibility while shifting the burden to others is unfair, and I will only support a program that treats Long Island residents and commuters fairly. This program stands to be a huge win for our region, $1 billion investment annually in our mass transit and in our subways. And it will help Long Island to finally get the world-class railroad service that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Senator Todd Kaminsky, followed by Matt Camper. Senator Kaminsky.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm State Senator Todd Kaminsky, and I appreciate this opportunity. And I echo so much of what Senator Kaplan had said. Long Islanders have lost a great deal of faith in the railroad. They want to know that any funding is going to go to very specific projects that will improve the quality of their commutes in a very real and material way for them. And those need to be laid out and made clear. But it's also important that while the whole point of congestion pricing is to get people to ride the rails, until that is we're way down the line on that, the tolling has to be fair. It cannot be so exorbitant that it crushes people. And at the same time, you also have to give people opportunities at different times, at less congested times, to opt to drive into the city then when the pricing might not be as high, and give people those options. And of course, the exemptions need to be made fair so that we're not driving people towards some roads and bridges and tolls and not others, which could create massive traffic problems and also lots of equity issues with respect to unfairness. So please be reasonable in how you do this. Please take Long Island voices into consideration. The cost of living here is very high. People consider moving all the time because of that. And adding some draconian fee to driving in the city, it would be very difficult for many to undertake and swallow. And of course, having a double toll from taking a bridge or tunnel in and a congestion pricing fee certainly does not seem fair and should not be made in some places and not others. So I hope we could invest in our public transit system in a meaningful way. It is necessary for our region to work, but we need to do this smart, well thought out and reasoned, and of course done fairly. Please consider Long Island voices when making this program. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Matt Camper, followed by Eric Goldner. Our next speaker will be Eric Goldner, followed by John Banzer. Eric?
Yes, hi. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time and hearing my voice. Just to really start briefly, I'm 25 years old, born and raised in Roslyn, New York on Long Island. Some of the best memories that I've had are driving into the city with my parents, driving into the city with my friends, right when I got my license at 17, 18 years old. I never thought twice about it, and why would I? I'm always supposed to go into New York City to have fun and be with my friends and family. Of course, I take the Long Island Railroad every day pre-COVID to commute to the office in the city. But with this congestion fee, that would inhibit me from doing that. Why should I, as a Long Islander, have to pay an additional fee to drive into New York City to do what I love to do, on top of everything else, such as the cost of living in Long Island, Nassau County, which is always on the rise? I understand why this program is being talked about due to the economic burden that COVID has caused, as well as environmental problems. But I ask that you reconsider this to really understand from a Long Islander's perspective what this means. It's not necessarily about the minimal fee that it is, it's what it stands for in principle. In conclusion, I really thank you for your time. Please consider what Long Islanders will feel. Take our emotions into consideration. And I really appreciate it. And as I said, remember myself, a 25-year-old who loves to drive to New York City, loves the memories with friends, family. Traffic is always a problem, but as New Yorkers, we are known to be able to fight through that. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be John Banzer, followed by Shahrukh Rahan.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
How are you, everybody? Thanks for coming. I find that this is a complete and total unacceptable use of our time and funds. This was crammed down our throat by a corrupt governor who didn't care about what he was doing or the people under him or the safety or well-being of them. We've had numerous bridges which have been operating as derelict that I've had the unfortunate have had to pray that nothing goes wrong as we drive over them. We've priced people out of using bridges to nudge them along to get them a little bit further down the road. And I have a vote of zero confidence for the Long Island Railroad that has had 100 years to electrify 60 miles worth of track. We're not doing it. I refused in any way, shape, or form to allow somebody to send my data, track me, to do any of these things. We've had and to pay a 90% VIG to go to work or to look for work, because as an artist that's been discriminated against in the city, by the city during the pandemic, we're at our wit's end. The audacity of the MTA president to come on down and say, go back to Broadway after we were told that we're not allowed to go around and do what we love and all these other things. It won't be tolerated. You know, I'm going to, as of right now, I'm considering this public notice of 32 days for all of the people whom were here as elected officials and everything. If I find out that any of you have made more than $20 off of any of these companies that have been price gouging us, we're going to make sure that you spend a day in federal court. I've had to watch my friends' art be crushed. And furthermore, I reserved the right to drive all my drunk friends home without having them to be screwed over by Uber and Lyft, another entity which you guys have been using continuously as a political pawn. There's been suicides, overwork, people getting fired, people afraid to go to the Department of Labor because they're afraid ICE is waiting there. Thank you. And again, we're not paying for this. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Shahrukh Rahan, followed by Lisa Dagwin.
Yes, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have no comments. I would just like to listen to other feedback. You can go ahead and move to the next participant. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Lisa Dagwin, followed by Susan Solo.
Hi, can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Hi, great. Good evening. My name is Lisa Dagley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA PCA. I'm also a regular here on the Montauk branch. The LARR gets me where I need to go, but infrastructure and signal upgrades are essential to speeding up the trip. Congestion pricing is the way to make that happen. Recent historic storms and flooding have tested our rail infrastructure, but with service restored by the following day, we've seen the resiliency of the LARR. We have to make sure we're prepared to face worsening extreme weather by funding critical infrastructure improvements around the region. Congestion pricing will help us avoid a grim reality for the MTA's future. Without a long-term strategy, it's like congestion pricing. Every day, commuter rail, subway, bus riders will take the hit. The $1 billion bonded to $15 billion brought in by congestion pricing are more than just crucial. They will be the lifeblood of the entire New York City metropolitan area and the jobs that they bring in. Commuters have a ton of questions about congestion pricing. What will the tolls cost? Will drivers be charged per trip or per day? What will traffic look like outside the zone? Who will be exempt? We understand that getting answers is part of the environmental assessment and subsequent deliberations of the Traffic Mobility Review Board, and expect those meetings to be held in public. But even with the unknown, we're certain that congestion pricing is the future of Long Island and the Long Island Railroad. Projects like repairing and making more stations ADA accessible, third track and east side access, and critical track, signal, and power upgrades will help ensure that Long Islanders have safe, reliable, efficient service. Congestion pricing with few exemptions is the only feasible way to raise funds for essential improvements to Long Island Railroad. It's the best way to make sure that fare discounts and flexible fare options are possible, bringing more riders to the commuter rail system by making it more affordable. We've seen how similar fare reduction options work successfully in New Jersey and beyond. Taking the railroad into the city isn't just good for the environment.
Conclude your remarks.
Yes, congestion pricing can make it even better.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Susan Solo, followed by Matt Camper.
Good evening. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Susan Solo, and I live in the Five Towns. For years, I've been using the Long Island Railroad to commute from Rosedale, Queens to Penn Station, Manhattan. And I walk to my employer, which is on First Avenue and East 23rd Street. Tonight, I wanted to share why I fully support the proposal to implement the Central Business District tolling, no exception or carve-outs. New York has led the world in delivering reliable service for commuters in New York City and surrounding counties. However, the quality of the service is dropping, while other major cities are investing heavily in transit. New York City subways are moving people all over. They're moving millions of people who are the workforce of the city, students and tourists, without the use of the car. However, this past month, September, this month, the trains are using very old technology that was developed way back in the 70s. Now, many of the stations are not even accessible for the handicaps, even though that the law had been implemented in many other cities. New York needs to be a fair city, and it needs to do better to improve access to everyone. I walk every day from Penn Station to 23rd Street, and the roads are getting more dangerous for me. The city bike riders are actually using the sidewalks because they are afraid of the cars. I see how the pedestrian and myself, we are concerned about the high volume of cars. We need to promote better modes of transportation into the city. We need to improve the bus, the subways, and the trains. We also need to promote more bicycles. The solution is simple. We need to reduce the congestion. Similar proposals have been used in other areas, and New York needs to do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Matt Camper, followed by Chris Hayward.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Matt Camper. I am a Long Island resident for over 26 years, and I'm here tonight to talk about congestion pricing. Congestion pricing is a thing that has been talked about for many years, and as a resident, as a commuter on the Long Island Railroad, and seeing the congestion firsthand along the LIE, people trying to get from Long Island who may need to drive into Manhattan, congestion is absolutely worse than ever. And I completely, for that reason, support congestion pricing. We need to reduce the congestion across this region. We need to reduce the congestion of people trying to drive into Manhattan and encourage riders to get back onto mass transit where they belong, because it's going to help for emergency personnel. It's going to help for the first responders who have helped us through this COVID-19 pandemic. And as a resident, I feel that we need to reduce the congestion that is on the roads throughout this region and for those trying to drive into Manhattan. And as far as the concerns that I've heard throughout this process, as far as the residents in Manhattan, I do also feel that residents in Manhattan do deserve to get some kind of exemption for people who live in Manhattan, because it would not be fair to those residents if they have to pay just to park in Manhattan as a resident. So I feel they do absolutely need an exemption, and I hope that you guys can please consider that as we go forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our final two speakers of the night are Chris Hayward, followed by Liam Blank. If you joined Zoom under a name that is different from the one you used to sign up, please identify yourself in the Q&A function with the name you used when you signed up. Our next speaker will be Liam Blank.
Good evening. My name is Liam Blank. I'm Policy and Communications Manager for Tri-State Transportation Campaign, which is a 28-year-old advocacy and policy organization fighting for sustainable mobility in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We have always understood that congestion pricing is not simply about the tolling system, but about the toll that traffic congestion and air pollution exacts on the livability of our city and the health and well-being of our most vulnerable communities. New York must rise to the challenge of significantly scaling back greenhouse gas emissions to achieve an 85% reduction and a 100% net zero carbon emission economy by 2050. This goal requires a rapid reshaping of the economy and how we view the urban environment. As one of the most climate vulnerable and diverse coastal cities, New York City must lead the way for major cities nationally and around the world. Since the devastating impact of Superstorm Sandy in 2012, we have been at the front line of the climate crisis that will continue to negatively impact the entire region. Torrential downpours and flash flooding, like what we have seen in recent weeks, are expected to occur more frequently and become even more severe. We must act now to reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector, and this starts with implementing congestion pricing. Not only is this a win for the environment and public health, it's also a win for millions of transit riders who rely on a transit system that needs new revenue streams to fund its multi-billion-dollar capital program. Within 30 counties that make up the project study area, 52% of residents are people of color and 13% of residents have household incomes below the poverty line, according to the MTA. The vast majority of commuters into Manhattan CBD reach their destination by public transit, and low-income people represent the largest share of public transit riders in the city. While congestion pricing by itself won't solve every transportation challenge our city faces, it's an integral part of our larger strategy to make urban transportation more efficient, sustainable, and equitable. Tri-State has been fighting for congestion pricing for well over a decade, and now it's finally within reach. We cannot afford to delay any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker of the night will be Andrew Sparberg. Andrew?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Let me just bring up my my statement. If you'll give me a moment, I just lost it. Just gotta bring this down. Okay, then I'll just paraphrase what I was going to say. My name is Andrew Sparberg. I am a 62-year resident of Nassau County. I'm also a retired transportation professional, both from Long Island Railroad and from the predecessor agency to NIMTIC. I'm now currently an adjunct faculty member at the City University of New York. The transportation demands of the Nassau, Queens, Suffolk corridor have only gone up. If you look at a couple of statistics, you will see that from the last 40 years, the number of people who travel between this corridor and Manhattan south of 60th Street has gone up from over 650,000 in 1981 to over 750,000 today. So the demand is there, and yet the subway capacity in Queens has barely increased in the last 80 years. Long Island Railroad track capacity is only increasing now because of the third track and the Grand Central Access that's currently under construction. So congestion pricing, in my professional and personal opinion, is needed, and it's time to implement it now. It's very important. Let's not lose this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next and final speaker will be Chris Hayward.
Hello?
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you for this opportunity to comment about the proposed congestion pricing tolling program. I think that many speakers here and in other meetings have brought up many good reasons that we need to implement the congestion pricing with utmost speed, much faster than the 16 months. That's going to take too long. There's many reasons in terms of environment, greenhouse gas, pollution, safety, noise pollution, equity, et cetera, that the congestion pricing should be implemented. I wanted to note here that I think that the current plan is too Manhattan focused, and that we actually should consider congestion pricing that encompasses the outer boroughs. Specifically, one of the reasons I'm concerned is that I live in Park Slope, and I can imagine that people will drive from Long Island and from other suburban areas and use mine and other neighborhoods as a park and ride in order to get into Manhattan. And we already see many of the same problems in my neighborhood that we see in Manhattan due to congestion. One big problem is we have many people from the placard class, so police and firefighters, for example, city employees that drive in from their homes in Long Island. And they decide that because they have placards and they know that NYPD won't do anything, they park on the sidewalks. Just this day on the walk to my kid's school, 7 blocks from my apartment, many parents walking their kids to school, right outside the fire department, there was a firefighter that had his car parked in the middle of the sidewalk and basically said to me, "What are you going to do about it? The police don't care." These are the kind of people that should be taking the train. They should not be driving into the city, honking their horns, blocking the sidewalks, putting my children and other pedestrians and cyclists at risk. So please consider going even beyond just Manhattan and doing congestion pricing that includes the outer boroughs also. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this evening. For those who did not do so already, we encourage you to take our short survey via the QR code or link currently being displayed. The link can also be found in the Q&A section of the Zoom. For details about upcoming webinars and how to sign up to speak at them, please visit new.mta.info/project/CBDTP or by calling the public meeting hotline at 646-252-6777. As a final reminder, in addition to the virtual public webinars, there are several other ways you can provide comments, ask questions, or make requests. We encourage the public to comment via the CBDTP website, new.mta.info/project/CBDTP. You may also email comments to cbdtp@mtabt.org. Send them via mail to CBD Tolling Program, 2 Broadway, 23rd floor, New York, New York, 10004, or call 646-252-7440. The time is currently 6:52 p.m. This concludes our webinar. Thank you again for your participation.